Rock and roll. 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 Rock, 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 rock.
Stay tuned for more rock and roll.
All right. Welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast. I'm Don 𝗙𝗪𝗪, and today's episode should prove to be a watershed moment for our humble little show. Our upcoming special guest interview has charted 38 times on the Billboard Hot 100, with a staggering 21 of them reaching the top 40, including 1975's #1 smash hit, You're No Good. Willie Nelson famously said there are two types of men in this world, those with a crush on her and those who've never heard of her. And I think you all know which camp I'm in. Of course, I'm talking about a true living legend, Ms. Linda Ronstadt. Our guest today requires no introduction, and frankly, any feeble attempt on my part at making one would only be inadequate, because there aren't enough words to sufficiently articulate her contribution to not only the world of rock, but to the fabric of music itself across a landscape of genres. It is my profound honor to welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, Linda Ronstadt. Good afternoon, Linda.
Thank you very much. Hi.
Hi.
I'm here.
I feel like we've been through a war together. We've had a menagerie of technical issues.
Oh, it's an age thing, being 74 years old.
Well, I'm 50, and I still miss the old days.
Need a teenager.
Well, you famously come from a musical family. I know your paternal grandfather had his own band, and your dad was an accomplished singer himself. So talk a little bit about how that affected you growing up in Tucson.
Well, music was just a part of what you did. Like my grandfather had a band, but he was a rancher in the area. And if you wanted to have music, you had to make it yourself, because there wasn't any television or cell phones or whatever it is we play music on now.
Yeah.
And you just had to play your own music. So if you wanted to have somebody for a wedding or a funeral or a bar mitzvah or whatever, you'd have to call my grandfather and he'd have to make it. He'd come over there with a band. But in his real life, he was a rancher.
Give me an idea of the years of that time period.
1890s.
Amazing.
Into probably 1915. So everybody in my family played, sang. Everybody in my family, including the cousins and the aunts and uncles, could, sing harmonies. And at a party, it wasn't for performing. It wasn't like you got a party piece and performed it. It was that everybody knew this group of songs, mostly in Spanish.
Right.
And they knew the harmonies. They knew some of the words. They knew the melodies. And they knew sort of what they meant. And we all sang together. Some people played instruments, and not everybody.
What did you play? Did you play any instruments at all?
I played guitar and a little bit of piano.
Yep. When you were growing up as a young girl and a teenager, radio must have been incredibly important to you.
Well, the radio was all we had in Tucson. I mean, I lived way out in the country, and there weren't a lot of other kids around. I didn't have a friend until I was 5. That's about a good time to make a friend anyway. And anybody younger, when you're younger than that, it's just somebody that gets in the way of your toys.
Right.
You don't want to share. But I can't remember what you asked me.
Well, about radio, any specific stations, DJs, memories?
Well, first of all, there was a dance band station called KCNA. It played Benny Goodman and stuff like that. It played dance band music. Then there was KTKT, which is a rock and roll station. And I like that. I like early rock and roll.
Obviously.
And there was, on Saturdays, there was a live broadcast from the Metropolitan Opera that we listened to. My grandmother loved that. I used to go over to her house and listen to it with her when I was a little kid. There was the Mexican radio, and there was country radio, and there was XCRF Del Rio, Texas, that broadcast all the way from Texas to Detroit, and all the way into Canada. It was an illegal transmitter, and we got rhythm and blues and gospel music, black and white gospel music. We had the Louisiana Hayride. Right. So I had a real broad spread of music. And
I know you've said that rampant eclecticism is your middle name.
Yeah.
Early rock and roll is so pervasive in your repertoire. Buddy Holly, Everly Brothers, Roy Orbison. What are some of your earliest memories of rock and roll itself?
The first rock and roll thing I remember was the Elvis Presley record, I think. I can't remember what it was.
Heartbreak Hotel?
It was before that. It was Heartbreak Hotel and those RCA Victor ones?
Yeah. Don't Be Cruel.
The Sun Sessions were the ones that I liked.
Oh, like That's All Right, Mama.
Yeah. Don't Be Cruel was one of the Sun Sessions.
I thought that was a flip side of Hot.
Maybe it was Rock Around the Clock, the first thing I ever heard on the radio.
Okay.
I didn't like it that much. But I like the stuff that came afterward. I like Little Richard.
Oh, yeah.
And I never liked Elvis Presley after he got off of the Sun label. I thought it would sound like a dumb hick.
Yeah.
Which is what Colonel Parker made him into.
And then after the Army, forget it.
Yeah. Not any good.
No.
But I'm not that much of a rock and roll fan. I like classical music. I like rock and roll okay. I like it if it's really good. But it's not my favorite thing I sang by a long shot.
And you moved to Santa Monica when you were 18. You started the Stone Ponies.
Right.
What were your initial memories of the scene itself?
Well, I drove over toting my guitar in a wooden case. It had belonged to my grandfather. He bought it new. It was a Martin. He bought brand new in 1896.
Oh, my God.
Which he then gave to my father with the words in Spanish, "Since you now own a guitar, you never need go hungry." So when I was leaving for California, my father gave me the guitar. It was a really beautiful, rare guitar. And he gave it to me. He said, "Now that you have a guitar, you never need to go hungry."
Wow.
So I was playing my old guitar in the Stone Ponies. And the first person we went to see was 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃. And I heard 𝗀𝗃𝗃 play, and I put my guitar away. He said, "I don't need to play guitar over here. He's got it covered."
Do you still have that guitar?
Yes, I gave it to my nephew.
That's beautiful.
The same advice. So it was time for it to pay. I'd had it for 50 years, 60 years.
Served you well.
Yeah, 50 years.
So now you obviously played the Troubadour famously.
We went to visit all the places. We went and visited the 𝗀cie𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗀. We got a job at the Insomniac, which was down in Hermosa Beach, kind of a beatnik hippie dive. And we thought we were paid the big time. We were getting paid to play music. Not very much, but we were getting paid something. So then we went to the Troubadour and auditioned. And they hired us right away. But we weren't very good. We opened for Odetta. And when we played that, fan came up to me. His name was 𝗙𝗃𝗃𝗃. He said, "I want to talk to you." So he took me to the restaurant next door, which is Dantana's. And he said he thought he could get me a recording deal, but he didn't think he could get one for the band. And that didn't make the band very happy. And I said, and I wasn't ready to be a solo artist. I was a band singer. I was mostly singing harmonies. And I said I didn't think I could do it without the band. So he managed to finagle a contract with the band. We did 2 records together. They didn't sell very well. But the second one had a hit record on it. So we made a 3rd record with my name in front of the Stone Ponies. And then the Stone Ponies went away to another place. Kenny went to India, and Bobby opened up a club.
Right.
a really good one called 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃. And I went on the road by myself with a band, any band I could hire. That was hard. I didn't, I was doing a lot of country music, and it was hard to find people that could play with the real country approach.
Well, I want to talk about Different Drum a little bit, because as everyone knows now, it was written by future Monkey Mike Nesmith. I think
I didn't even know he wrote it.
You were doing the Greenbrier Boys version, right?
Yeah, I heard it on a bluegrass record.
Right.
Just like I first heard Chris Hillman on a bluegrass record. He was in a bluegrass band called the Scottsville Squirrel Barkers. And that was one of the reasons that we tried to electrify our instruments is the Stone Ponies.
Yep.
It was hard to do because we didn't know anything about electric music, so we put pickups on our acoustic guitars, which meant that they were somewhat louder than the air conditioning in any club we were playing with, but our voices weren't.
Right. Now, you mentioned 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. He was Zappa's manager at the time.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
I really liked him. He was a man of questionable virtue. He had great taste in antiques. He had beautiful stuff in his house, beautiful rugs and beautiful furniture. And I liked talking to him. He was kind of a no bullshitter,
Yeah.
But he didn't pay Frank's taxes, so that made Frank annoyed with him.
Oh, yeah.
And he got me wound up in jail. I wound up in jail because he gave the band, we were going to Hawaii for the Capitol Records Convention. And they said they would pay for first class tickets to go there. And he bought the first class. He had them send him the money, and then he bought the first class tickets at a hot agency, sold hot tickets.
Yeah.
And we didn't know anything about it. We were just issued these tickets, and we got arrested for having stolen airline tickets.
Oh, my God.
So that did not endear me to him.
No. Did you fire him right after that?
Shortly after that, yeah.
I talked to John Boyle, and he didn't tell me that story.
Well, he was with us.
Yeah.
He was with us. Yeah. And I had to pay to Herbie a lot of money. I had to pay him because I'd already re-signed the contract.
Right.
I had to pay him $80,000, which is actually real money in those days.
Oh, God, yeah.
Took me a long time to work it off, but I was happy to. And I stayed friends with him. We were friends before he died.
Is that when you had John stop working with you?
Yeah. Well, John suggested I get Peter Asher. Peter wasn't available. John was working as a record producer for a label as a kind of an A&R man and stuff like that.
Right.
He was anxious to get back to his record career. Peter first turned me down because he was managing Kate Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And then Kate Taylor decided she didn't really want to work. So I wound up working with Peter after all.
I want to double back just a little bit. I know when your early tours, you toured with the Doors.
Yeah, we did 4 months.
You've got to have some stories from those days.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, the band was really good. I remember seeing them at the 𝗀cie𝗽𝗃𝗃𝗃 and saying, God, that's really a good band. They were a trio. And I thought if they just get rid of their singer, they could have hits. And I continued to feel that way until the end of our tour. But, Morrison, he was a troubled guy.
Yeah.
I didn't think he was a very good singer, but he was magnetic.
Yeah.
The fans loved him. And I remember walking down the street with him one night in New York City, and somebody stopped their car, got out, and came up and punched him.
So it was in a weird position as a superstar, you know.
Yeah.
But he was drunk all the time. And he wore the same pair of snakeskin pants every day.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Gross.
Yeah.
He wasn't exactly the person you wanted to sit next to.
Yeah.
You know, the band was great. Ray Manzarek was the keyboard player, and he played bass with his feet.
Yeah.
And John Densmore was the drummer, I think. And oh no, he was the guitar player.
No, John Densmore, drummer. Robbie Krieger, guitar.
Robert Krieger, yeah. They were really nice. All three of those guys they were all grown ups, and they were nice. They were good players.
Right. How was Jim to deal with backstage or on the road?
He was sort of sweet when he was sober and kind of sullen when he wasn't. Or he was not even sullen. He was just sort of absent.
Yep.
Kind of had a blank look in his eyes. He got very, very drunk.
And I know you also befriended Janis Joplin around that time.
Well, we ran into each other at the Troubadour Bar. We had a mutual friend, Maria Muldaur, whom we agreed was the sexiest girl we knew in the business.
Sure.
We were talking about what to wear on stage, and we agreed that Maria had the best clothes.
I know on the recording of Different Drum, you had future Derek and the Dominoes drummer Jim Gordon, as well as future Eagle Bernie Ledden. Tell me how the Eagles came into your life.
Well, I was playing country rock music with a pedal steel player. I was recording with a pedal steel player, but I couldn't afford to take a pedal steel player on the road and a guitar player. So Bernie played this guitar that was invented by Clarence White that had a pedal on the second string. You could push down the neck and it would change the pitch of the second string.
Right.
And it was a real technique to learn how to play it. And Bernie knew how to play it, so it could sound like a pedal steel. So with Bernie, I had to two for one. So I had him in the band as much as I could, but he was also working with the Flying Burrito Brothers. When the Burrito Brothers' career took off and they got a lot of gigs, Bernie couldn't play with me anymore. And I was living with John David Souther at the time, who had been partners with Glenn Frey. They had a duo together called Long Branch Penny Whistle. And so I knew Glenn could play pretty well, so I thought I'd get Glenn to replace Bernie, even though he didn't play the pedal guitar. And then one night I was walking through the Troubadour, and I heard this band called 𝗙𝗲𝗄, and they were playing my version of Silver Threads and Golden Needles, including the guitar solo word for word, or note for note. And I thought, wow, they already know the song, maybe I can get their drummer. So I tried to hire the drummer, and 𝗙𝗲𝗄 was just breaking up, or things weren't going well for them. They'd come recently from Texas. So he agreed to do it. And that's how I introduced Glenn to Don. They were rooming together in the same room. We didn't have enough money for everybody to have their own hotel room.
Right.
So they had to double up. And they started writing songs together, and then they decided to form a band. So at that point, Bernie wasn't in the band. They hadn't played with Bernie. So we suggested Bernie, because we thought he was so good, and they played with him, and they loved him. And then John suggested, what's the bass player's name?
Randy Meisner?
Randy Meisner. Yeah, I knew it was an R word.
Yeah.
John suggested Randy Meisner, who could sing higher than God. And the four of them came over to JD and my house to rehearse. And I heard them. We went out to the movies, and we came back a couple hours later. They'd been working on 𝗀𝗎𝗄𝗏 in 4-part harmony.
Oh, wow.
And it sounded amazing. And that room was a small room with wood floors and good sounding room.
Yeah.
And they tuned their voices and their harmonies to the room. I'll never hear it again like that. As well as it's recorded on the record, it wasn't like that in the house. It was just all acoustic guitars. It was fantastic. They were an excellent vocal band.
Mm-hmm. And yet, well, first of all, how long were they your backing band?
About a year.
Was that the period where you did the first major tour with Neil Young?
No, they weren't in the band then. No, the Neil Young tour was second to that.
Second to that, okay. And yet, when they left to do the Eagles, a lot of artists would have been really pissed off.
Oh, yeah. I knew that when Don and Glenn started playing songs together, I knew they were going to be their own band. I never had any expectation that I could keep together as a unit. And I didn't want to. They were really good. They would have mowed me down, they wouldn't have been able to help themselves. They needed to be their own band, so I never expected them to stay. And I was delighted when they were successful, because that day I heard 𝗀𝗎𝗄𝗏, and I knew they were going to be hits.
And you helped them along too, because your version of Desperado, most people know, was more famous.
My version of Desperado was so terrible. I'm embarrassed about it.
What?
I learned how to sing it better when I sang it on stage, but I didn't like the arrangement, and I didn't like the way I sang it. It took a little while for that song to be recognized. I was also really surprised when that record that they made, that had Doolin Dalton and Desperado on, it was a really good record.
Yeah. It
wasn't a hit. I could never figure out why.
It doesn't help when your own producer's not behind you. That's another story.
Well, whatever happened, it was. I thought it was in the grooves.
Tell me about that first tour I mentioned, first arena tour, I would imagine.
Well, the first place we played was Madison Square Garden, and I had only played clubs.
Wow.
So, and I had a club act and a club band, and I had sort of medium level musicians. It was pretty intimidating. We somehow managed to succeed, but I don't know why. I was changing backup singers all the way across the country.
Really?
Yeah, I finally got, because I had the guys trying to sing harmony. They were doubling on guitar and bass and whatever. Finally got some harmony singers. I had Diane Davidson for a while. And then I had these sisters. I can't remember what they're called. I can't remember any names anymore. They've all gone.
What about Andrew Gold? Was he with you at that point, or would that come? Did he come
that
later?
Was later.
Much
He was later.
I keep jumping ahead.
It's okay.
I remember seeing on the Graham Parsons album, you have a backup singing credit on In My Time of Darkness. Were you close with Graham?
I knew Graham really well because he was at the Troubadour every night. I knew him as well as I knew Chris Hillman. I hung out with him a little bit. Graham wasn't a very careful person, and I am a careful person. So I rode with him on a motorcycle up to someplace one time, and he passed out, and I wasn't happy about that. So I don't like being stranded. It made me decide never to go anywhere ever without my own mode of transportation. It was a good lesson to learn. But I liked Graham's songs. He seemed like a drowning boy to me.
How so?
He just seemed like he wasn't able to swim. He seemed like he couldn't keep his head above water.
Yeah.
Feckless. And willing to be kicked around. Or not kicked around, but blown around without a rudder.
That's insightful. That's true. Your political views. It's so rare these days for people to come out and say what they want to say without getting some sort of retribution for it, which is unfortunate. And I have a very vivid memory of you playing Vegas in 2004 at the Aladdin. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I made the most harmless remark. I dedicated a song to Michael Moore.
Who's a great...
I admired. He's great. And I admired him especially because of the documentary he did about Flint, Michigan, which is where my mother's from.
Yeah, Roger and me.
And how he exported the jobs. They're now blaming that on the Republicans. I mean, it's just perverse the way the Republicans twist things.
Right.
But it was totally the fault of greed that they dismantled the factories and the machines and shipped them to China. And Michael Moore was on their side. He was trying to defend them. And they turned around and voted against their own interests. They voted in Trump, who will never help them. Will bring the country down to its knees. It's already done so.
I agree. In general, do you think musicians have a responsibility to say what they believe? I have a
responsibility. I think I believe in what Frank Sinatra said. He said, I always owe the public the best show I can do. And he said, I sing for anybody, all creeds, all colors, all races, drunk or sober.
Yep.
It's probably the only thing I'd agree with Frank Sinatra about. He was a turncoat, too. He turned Republican.
For a rather foolish reason.
Absolutely foolish.
What's always curious about, and you said it in the documentary, you felt that your band didn't think it was cool working for a chick singer. Your words, not mine. And
right.
That you wish that they were kind of like working their own all-male band. Was that ever articulated in any manner, or was just your sense?
Oh, sure.
Really?
Of course.
Wow.
I mean, we were all friends. We didn't have any secrets from each other.
How did you deal with that?
I just hired the best players I could and did the best I could on stage. We weren't very good for a long time. I didn't really start singing until 1980.
Oh, I don't agree with that, but okay. I've heard you say that before. I can't imagine why you're so hard on yourself. I don't get it.
Well, I don't think anything I did until 1980 was worth much. There were some good things on Mad Love, but just measures, the choruses or a phrase here and there. I was starting to open up then, but it wasn't until after I went to Broadway that I really learned how to sing.
Well, I know for me, my two favorite albums are Mad Love and Get Closer. Maybe because that's when as a 10, 11-year-old, that's when I discovered you.
Yeah.
I hate to second guess you because, you are the artist. Just know that it is very odd to hear Linda Ronstadt say that Linda Ronstadt wasn't a great singer until 1980. But who cares what I say? I want to know your worst gig.
Oh, I think playing the Calaveras County Fair was so hot. It was 110. And the stage was so hot I could feel it through my shoes. I had to pour water on the stage to even be able to stand on it.
What year was this?
1978, maybe.
Okay.
Guys were burning their fingers on the strings and on the pickups.
Wow.
It was just not conducive for music. Those big outdoor gigs were just kind of a clusterfuck, I think. I never liked them. I liked the small, intimate, like a small theater, about 700 seats. It's ideal for me, but you never make any money.
Right.
And I used to say, I want to play small theaters. And they go, yeah, right, dear. They book a 40,000-seat arena.
I like your quote about why you don't like the sound of a big stadium, big arenas.
Oh, you mean you can still hear the guitar player solo from last week?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, they're so live. They're not made for music. They're not made to concentrate They're made for circus events.
Right.
There's so many distractions to the audience that they don't have a proscenium to focus their attention.
Tell us about Linda and the Mockingbirds.
Well, I've been working for 25 years, 27 years with a group called Los Sensones. They're a cultural group. It's a cultural center. They're a little group that teaches about 300 kids a week how to play traditional Mexican instruments, how to sing the music, how to dance the traditional styles. And I mean the deep tradition that are in the villages, not show business. And also visual art. And it's one of the best places I've ever seen for teaching music. They teach the kids music not to be trained performing fields, but to really hang out with each other and socialize in the best possible way, or play with their families.
Right.
Play music for the reason that music evolved, I was going to go to Mexico. I was going to Mexico to visit the little town where my grandfather was born, in northern Mexico and along the Rio Sonora. It's a very tiny little town. And I love the whole area. The Rio Sonora is a valley that is equal in fertility to the San Joaquin Valley in California. It's the richest soil in Mexico. Mm. And the farmers have been farming the same way for 500 to 1,000 years. It's just the same way of getting water from the river, and it's a very sustainable kind of farming. It's alluvial soil. It's really rich. And I love the way of life down there. It's very cooperative. People are they're pretty well educated, and they have a good social system.
Right.
So I like going down there. So I said I was going, and I said to Eugene Rodriguez, who runs the Sensones, I said, why don't you bring the kids? Because they've made several trips to Mexico where they go to small villages and learn from the masters of these traditional kinds of music. And so they have a good dance troupe in this little town where my grandfather was born. They win all the national contests. I thought it would be a fun thing for the dancers to have an exchange, for them to see what life was like in northern Mexico. And so we had a bus, and Jackson Brown had been working with the Sensones too. He'd written a song with them and recorded it and made it into a video. It's about migrants. Mm-hmm. I said, why don't you come along with us? And he came. And then my nephew, Petey, usually goes with my nephew and my cousin, Bobby George, usually go with these trips. This friend of mine would take these trips down to Mexico from time to time. And my cousin and my nephew usually go with them to play music. Play it on the bus, play it in the restaurant where they are, play it in picnics, just like we used to do as family. All these Mexican songs. So they went along. And it was just a family trip. There were 3 generations of Ronstadts and the Sensones to make music and dance. It was just a real fun. It was very different from a rock and roll tour on the bus.
Oh, I bet.
We had a lot of fun during rock and roll, but not as fun as the Sensones.
So that's great. You're going to be doing a documentary?
Well, there's a documentary coming out.
Yep.
I didn't have anything to do with it, really. I mean, I invited the producer of the documentary that they made about me. He wanted an interview, and I said, you have to come to Mexico if you want an interview. So then I invited the Sensones on top of it, and he loved the Sensones and decided to make a documentary about them.
That's beautiful. That's cool. Thank you for the music. Thank you for your time. Please keep releasing old concerts and put out some Blu-rays and stuff, because your music is among the best ever made, and I mean that.
Well, I found some board mixes. They're not very well recorded. They're board mixes, but they're of live shows, and I'm going to take some of the tracks. I'm going to find a good version of The Moon's Harsh Mistress and put it on my website. I've never had a website before. I never gave a shit about it.
Yeah. I
don't do any social media. I can barely get email. I can sometimes operate my cell phone, but not very efficiently, as you can tell. And I never use my laptop, so I've forgotten how it works. But and I can't type either because of my disability.
Right.
So John Boylan finally convinced me that we have to have a website. So I'm going to put some of these songs up there.
Oh, that's great.
Let you know when we get it up and running.
The great Linda Ronstadt right there, who I want to thank again for being a part of the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast.